2 shots separated by either 3 or 4 weeks. The Pfizer vaccine in the clinical trials was already tried in individuals 12 years and above, so a little different from the Moderna vaccine where only individuals 18 years or older were in the clinical trials. And that's important because we can only prove safety and conclude safety when folks in the clinical trial are a certain demographic or age, have tried the vaccine, then we can say that this demographic or age is safe to take the vaccine. So that's why recently, as many of you know, children 12 years or older are now allowed to take the vaccine because of the new data that just came out last month from the Pfizer vaccine. So very quickly, and this will take you back a little bit to the okay, all right. This will take you a little bit back to the biology class in high school. But essentially, just to explain how these vaccines work, I'm just going to quickly go over how just in general the cells in our body function. So the part that I want you to know is that each one of our cells, whether it's a muscle cell, a liver cell, a cell in your skin, in your brain, it has a nucleus. Inside the nucleus, there is material called DNA, which I know all of you are familiar with. The DNA is essentially a code of 4 letters. And this code is used by each cell to form proteins. Now, each cell, despite having all of the DNA, will only use a small amount of that DNA to form proteins. So if it's a liver cell, it'll only form proteins that are important for the liver. If it's a stomach cell, it'll only use the DNA that is going to make proteins that are going to digest food. If it's a muscle cell, it's only going to form proteins from that DNA that's going to build muscle. So each one of our cells has, despite having all of the DNA that can be used to form anything in the body, but each one is just specialized in using that DNA to form certain proteins that are important for this cell's function. So the 2 main vaccines used in the United States use this cellular mechanism to form the antibodies required to provide you protection against the virus. So the way that works is very ingenious, actually, and this is the first time that this has been used to form vaccines, and it's a very brilliant method. Essentially, what the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines do is that they give you a little part of that material, that nucleic acid material. It's not DNA, it's called RNA, but that little part goes into the cell and is used by the cell to form a protein, but this time the protein is that famous spike protein that is on top of the virus. So the virus has a part of it called the spike protein, and the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines give the message, the letters, that allow the cell to form the spike protein. And once the cells form the spike protein, then it's released into the bloodstream, and the body notices that this is not one of the human proteins. So the body forms antibodies against the spike protein. The antibodies, think of them as little torpedoes running around in your bloodstream, and they fight off infection. So the important part to sort of highlight here is that in none of this process was the material, the nucleic acid material, inserted into the nucleus. So if you remember, we talked about how the nucleus, this part here, has the DNA that is responsible for formation of all of our function. The vaccines, they don't go inside the nucleus at all. So if this is the nucleus, they do not insert themselves inside the nucleus. The material is outside the nucleus. So it's never inserted into your DNA at all. But outside the nucleus, it uses the cell's machinery to form protein without inserting itself into the DNA. So the cell's machines form the spike protein and it's released into the bloodstream, and that's the way the antibodies are formed. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine has a slightly different way of achieving this goal of forming these antibodies, in that it's the vaccine itself is not just this nucleic acid. No, it's actually a virus that's been killed, and it just carries the spike protein on top of it, so that once it's injected, it runs in the bloodstream, and similarly, the body notices that this is a foreign material and forms antibodies against it. So, as you notice, neither of these mechanisms involve any insertion into DNA or anything of that nature. The Moderna and Pfizer vaccines their technology is much better in terms of safety. They are much less prone to cause side effects and allergies, and we're probably lucky, actually, in the United States to have those two vaccines as our primary vaccines. So in places like Europe or elsewhere in the world, they're not the predominant vaccines. Other vaccines are present, like the AstraZeneca or the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. And the Johnson & Johnson or AstraZeneca vaccines, or even the Chinese vaccine, the CanSino or that Spunk vaccine, the Russians, that came out of Russia, all of these use old technology, which can cause more side effects. They're less effective. So whether the Johnson & Johnson or the Chinese vaccine or the vaccine from Russia, their efficacy is around 65% protection, whereas the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine are around 95% protection, with less side effects, because the technology they use is much more advanced. So this is just to show you, when you get the injection here, it contains this little nucleic acid material. This is the cellular machinery that I was talking about. This is the nucleus, so we're outside the nucleus where the DNA is, but this machine here takes the RNA that is the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine and makes a spike protein from it. The spike protein is released on top of the cell here, and that's where the body notices the spike protein and forms antibodies against it, and that's the way you develop protection. So the next time, if you actually are exposed to the COVID vaccine, you already have the antibodies that fight it right away, and it doesn't allow it to form the disease. It doesn't allow it to make you sick. And that's the big concept of how these vaccines work, is that they give you an earlier chance to fight off the infection without getting the disease, because you've already had the antibodies. So similar to all of us, when we've gotten like chickenpox, when we were children, we formed antibodies against the chickenpox virus, and then we don't get it again, if you guys remember. You know, once you've gotten it, then you can be exposed to people with chickenpox as a little kid, and you won't have a problem. So it's a similar effect. Because you have the antibodies, then you don't have to worry. And you know, it differs from disease or infection to infection or virus to virus, how effective these antibodies are. So we're actually pretty lucky that the the vaccines against the COVID virus are so effective. We were hoping that they would be, 60% effective, so it was a really pleasant surprise when they turned out to be 95% effective, so that's great. So this is just an illustration of how the other vaccines work, the AstraZeneca, the Oxford, the Johnson & Johnson, the CanSino, which is the Chinese vaccine, and the Spunk, which is the vaccine from Russia. So it's just a virus that's killed. It doesn't cause infection. So even the viruses have DNA. So the way they form these vaccines is they take out from the virus, they take out the DNA that is going to cause it to replicate, to make copies of itself. So that's why it's inactive. It doesn't cause you any problems. We don't need to know much about this vaccine, but if you want to learn more about it, if you have someone back home or something that's going to take one of these vaccines, I'm happy to talk about it to you more. We don't have these vaccines really in the United States. But like I said, they're less effective. They have a little bit more side effects. They're still good, but the Pfizer and Moderna are definitely better. So what happens in real life to people that have gotten the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines? So now I'm not talking about the clinical trials. The clinical trials are sort of, there's a magnifying glass on everything that happens in a clinical trial. So if you're a participant in these clinical trials, if you sneeze, they have to know about it and document that you sneezed. So everything in the clinical trial is magnified. The trial can say, the side effects happened in 20% of people. But in reality, these side effects could have been something that you and I would not have even reported, would not have even told our doctor about. It could have been something so simple. So these are actual real-life numbers. The Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, they gathered data from 31,000 vaccinated individuals and followed them to see who came back to the emergency room or spoke to their doctor when they saw him about a side effect from the vaccine. And it was very minor. So it was only reported in about 1% of people, fatigue, nausea in less than 1%, myalgias, meaning muscle pain, in less than 1%, diarrhea in less than 1%, joint pains, redness, vomiting, all of it less than 1%, so very minor stuff, fevers in less than, a fifth of a percent. So essentially, almost no side effects from these vaccines, any serious side effects, especially the Moderna and Pfizer is what I'm talking about now. The Johnson & Johnson, the AstraZeneca, they had some clotting issues. If you guys heard, people were forming clots. When you look into the numbers, it's also extremely, extremely rare. So when they studied it in the UK, it was 1 out of 100,000 people got a clotting disorder. So there's a 99.99% you don't get the clotting disorder. But to show you how safe the FDA and these other organizations around the world are, for that low of a number, they stopped using the Johnson & Johnson vaccine here. It was stopped until more data is gathered. AstraZeneca was stopped for a little bit in some countries in Europe until more data is gathered. Even though these clotting numbers are so low, it was still something that, unacceptable to these organizations that approve these vaccines. So the part about vaccination in children, like I said, in the clinical trial with Pfizer, children 12 years and above were included. So, and it was safe, no problem with the same side effect profile that I talked about. Now, they're doing both Moderna and Pfizer are doing clinical trials about younger populations. So starting from 6 months to 12 years old, they're doing the trials for the vaccines. The reason you have to do a different clinical trial is because children have a more robust immune system, so you'll need a lower dose in children to form the same amount of antibodies. So they have to figure out what's that lower dose going to be, and they have to try it to make sure that it works appropriately. Children, as you know, are far less likely to develop any complications from the vaccine, but they can have a very rare, 1 in 1,000, even less than that in some reports, can have a very rare inflammation that can be life-threatening. So that's why they want to protect children against COVID as well, because some of them do develop bad complications. So lastly, I'm just going to share the resources here. The ISBCC website should have a web page specifically devoted to the resources for COVID up and running. And I'm looking at someone to see if it is actually running. Not yet. I don't think so. Not yet. Okay. These are places you can get the vaccine. I'm sure everybody knows by now. You can get it at most pharmacies. It's become so available that you can just walk in. Specifically here, we have access to the Reggie Lewis Center clinic just across the street that you can just walk in, get the vaccine. And there are other places like the Whittier Street Health Center as well, and these are the addresses for that, for those locations. Lastly, I'm just going to show a slide. I found this interesting. I was doing some research to figure out how many people have been vaccinated across the United States. So what I found interesting, and I don't know if it's big enough, maybe I can try to zoom in. So the zoom in function is not really helping me. But essentially these on the left here were the states where the states are ranked according to the percentage of people that have got the vaccine. So what's interesting is the first 6 states are like the New England area. So Vermont, Maine, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Massachusetts are the highest percentage of people that have gotten vaccinated. So I was curious, you know, why that specific area is so good at getting the vaccine. And I just made this correlation. I found that that's where the highest education level is in the United States, actually, is the New England area. So Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine is the same sort of. So, you know, they may be correlated, they may be not, but I found it very interesting that the higher the education level of a certain location is, the more people are getting vaccinated. So that should tell you that, you know, you don't have to worry about these, misconceptions and unusual theories out there. But this is why we're having this session, so I'm happy to sort of answer any questions that you may have. Okay, go ahead.
If like the insects, like mosquitoes, can they spread this disease?
Can mosquitoes spread the disease?
Yeah.
That's your, right? The question is, can mosquitoes and just insects in general, spread the disease? No, they cannot. No.
Okay. What about can it get like at the same time, flu and the COVID, both of them at the same time?
Can you get both viruses at the same time? Yes. And that's if they're both human viruses. And a little bit of that answer is important for your first question. So not every virus can be carried by any animal. So mosquitoes and insects, they cannot get diseased by the COVID virus. Do you know what I mean? So each virus can only infect a certain group of creatures. So insects cannot be infected by, thank God, cannot be infected by the COVID-19 virus. There are other things that insects can carry, like Lyme disease, for example, but not COVID-19. Can you get both the influenza and the COVID vaccine virus at the same time in your body? Yes. And that's a problem because this is how mutations occur in viruses, is they meet each other in a host, and then they can transfer their genetic material. So most of the times, the transfer of genetic material between these viruses don't make them stronger viruses. But rarely, this virus is going to pick up a genetic material from the other virus that makes it even stronger. And then that virus propagates. So, that's a possibility, yes. You can get both viruses at the same time.
My question actually has 4 parts. Could you talk about the 2 most recent strands of COVID-19, which are considered to be more contagious? In addition to that, social distancing and masking, why they must be maintained, regardless of what is being propagated,
Whether or not you're vaccinated, is that your question?
Yeah.
Sure. So the new strains, fortunately, yes. So there's thoughts that there's a new strain in India, and whether we like it or not, unfortunately, it will probably spread elsewhere. What we know so far is that the vaccines we have here should be effective against these new strains, because these new strains still have that spike protein. So because these vaccines form antibodies against this spike protein, they still should be effective. Have we confirmed this in clinical trial? No, but we expect that to be the case, and we'll know when it happens. Your second question was about the masks and the social distancing. So the reasons these masks are so important, and this takes us pre-vaccine time, the way we've learned that these airborne viruses like influenza and COVID-19, they linger in the air from our droplets. So when I'm talking, there are droplets coming out, whether I like it or not. And depending on the size of these droplets, some of them drop to the ground and some of them can linger. What we know is that the farthest distance, that's where the 6 feet came from, the farthest distance the droplets are going to travel is the 6 feet. So that's why the 6 feet is important, and the mask similarly is to sort of stop these droplets which carry the virus from being spread in the air. As you know or may not know, the CDC has actually said if you're vaccinated, which is another reason you may want to get vaccinated, is you don't need to wear a mask in either open or closed spaces. But they still said at the same time, each state is still responsible for whatever instructions that it's going to give its citizens. So in Massachusetts, still we are required to wear masks, but we are not required to wear outdoor, actually. Good, excellent questions. So social distancing is the same as, it includes the 6 feet, if that's, if you're referring to the same thing. Unless you're referring to something else, I can, okay.
Assalamu alaikum, doctor.
Wa alaikum salam.
Yeah. I have a question specific to the B1617 variant, which is spreading in India. So from what I have heard, it's mostly anecdotal that the vaccines are not very effective against that specific variant. So are we letting our guards down by removing our masks and everything, because we are not certain if the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine will be effective against it?
So like we agree on that. We don't know is what we're saying. We think that it will work. You're saying that it doesn't work, right? Did I hear you right?
I'm suspicious about its effectiveness. I'm not really sure if it would work. So
Repeat that last part.
Yeah, so like I said, it's mostly anecdotal evidence, but
Anecdotal evidence, yep.
yeah, there's nothing concrete out there. So I believe we are taking a big risk by putting out mandates that say take off your masks and do everything as you were doing before.
Yeah, I agree with you. The safe way, I agree, would be until we have more data to not take off our masks. I think that's wise. There is a compromise that you have to make between being 100% safe and taking every precautions, and at the same time giving restrictions that people will actually follow. So, as you know, the way things have been politicized, the mask is even politicized. So whether you wear the mask or not has become, this political debate. So I think what the CDC has recommended is still adequate because it's working on data that it has that we haven't confirmed that the strain is being propagated at a dangerous level here in the United States. Plus, we know that this strain, when it's analyzed in labs, it also has the spike protein. So we think that the vaccines should be effective against it. The vaccines in India are not the same as we have here, as you know. So the fact that it's spreading in India, first of all, we don't know, is it just because of the vaccines are not effective, or is it because there are these super spreader events that keep happening? So, we may be falsely blaming working effectively. At the same time, we have a sort of different situation here in the United States. So, it's a compromise. I can see where the CDC sort of compromise at some point and say, well, if you're vaccinated, you don't need to wear masks because the data that you should not be spreading this.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Brother, if you had COVID-19 naturally and you didn't get very sick, or maybe you were asymptomatic, do you still need to get vaccinated?
The question is, can you fast?
No, if you had COVID-19.
If you get COVID-19?
Yes.
Yep.
Naturally, but you didn't get very sick, or maybe you were asymptomatic, do you still need
to get the vaccine?
Yes.
Okay, excellent question. There are two ways you can go about doing that. If you want, you can measure, if your doctor allows it, you can measure the antibody levels in your blood, and your doctor may be able to know, are those comparable to the levels that were recorded in the clinical trials? Sometimes, not every doctor has access to order these antibodies. Not every doctor may be willing to do that. Then certainly there's no harm in getting the vaccine after you've gotten the actual disease itself. We know that the antibodies that are formed from the disease, they do wear off after a few months, so you're not going to be protected lifelong. And there are people that have gotten the disease twice. So the safer way is to just get the virus, especially if many months have passed. If you want to really look into it, you can get the antibody levels. But there will be no harm, even if you have high levels of antibodies and you get the vaccine, zero harm, no problem. So there's no such thing as too many antibodies. It's not a problem. Go ahead. It's a really good question. Let me think about that a little bit. So the participants of the clinical trial, to my knowledge, haven't been followed long enough to see their antibody levels and see how long they have it. At least, in the research that I did leading up to this talk, I didn't see a paper saying you know, the participants in the Pfizer trial or the Moderna trial, and there was a lot of them. There was 45,000 in the Pfizer and 3,000 in the Moderna trial, but none of them got the vaccine, got a placebo. So the best way we can answer that would be to follow that population in time and just see how long they have the antibodies and how many of them are starting to get the disease. So far, there has not been a suggestion to do a booster dose. The broad picture of that is there are some viruses where you only need one vaccine all your life and that's it. So if you guys remember, there was a smallpox virus or the polio virus, which was a big thing where most of us are from. You only need it once and then that's it. You never needed a booster. So we need, I guess, to know whether or not the COVID is going to require a booster.
Thank you. This will be the last question, Dr. Mahmoud. Thank you.
Okay.
Bismillah. And I'm asking for the kids. Is it for the kids? And is it safe for the kids to give these vaccines? And is it the same one that we already took as adults?
So it's safe for children 12 years and older to take the vaccine. Right now, we have that data because just as of last month, the same Pfizer came out sort of a second set of data showing just in about 2,200 children from ages 12 to 16 that it was safe, it had the same effect, it was no problem. So 12 years and above, yes, you can get the vaccine, we know it's safe, there's no problem. 11 years and younger, and as soon as we have it, then you'll find that the CDC is going to recommend children get it. Do you have a question? Are you just trying to... Should we conclude it? Okay. Anybody else have a question? We can push this a little. When is Aisha?
If you get the COVID vaccine, are you required, like, let's say, sometime next year to get the flu vaccine too, or is it different?
It's safe to take the two of them. Okay. No problem. And as you know, for example, in babies that are just born, they get 3 or 4 vaccines at the same time within like 2 months. We don't worry about it too much because there's no harm in having a few of them at the same time. So you can certainly get the 2 vaccines. Go ahead. Preference? They're the exact same I consider them the same vaccine, honestly, because they're the exact same technology. And the proof that they are the exact same technology is that both of them was working independently. They came up with their vaccine, and they have the same effects in clinical trials. One is 94.5, one is 95, so they're really the same. I consider them the best vaccines in the world, the Pfizer and Moderna, and we are really pretty lucky to have them. You know, other countries, as you know, do not have access to those 2 excellent vaccines. But no, I don't have a preference between the 2 of them. Okay. Yeah. What we're trying to do in Masjid, and we have sort of funding from the state to do this, is we're hiring Somali interpreters, Arabic, you know, Urdu, and we are working on this to you're right, there is a language barrier. We depend on people like you, of course, to sort of transfer this knowledge, but it's a good point, and we are working on it, to my knowledge. Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, I think we only have 3 interpreters, but we'll do our best.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed,
You're welcome.
who is also our recently formed Health Advisory Committee. Thank you, Doctor.
Oh,
Thank you
you're
very
welcome.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't forget the food. We have a food in the back. Enjoy your food, guys. Thank you very much.